On a hot afternoon in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim studied the file on his desk. The presidential palace was quiet, most staff having departed for the day, leaving the young leader alone with his thoughts and the weight of a nation on his shoulders. The file before him had been discovered just hours earlier during a routine renovation of the National Treasury Room behind a panel that hadn't been opened in decades. Workers had found a sealed metal box containing documents that were never meant to be forgotten, Mr. President. His aide had said nervously when delivering the box. The workers thought you should see this immediately. Now, as the ceiling fan rotated lazily above, casting alternating shadows across the antique wooden desk, Traoré carefully examined the contents. The most significant item was a detailed map of Burkina Faso, but unlike any official map in circulation, this one showed extensive gold deposits across the country's northern regions. Deposits never documented in any government record, never included in any official survey, never disclosed to international mining companies or financial institutions. In the margins of the map, handwritten notes from former President Thomas Sankara, assassinated in 1987, sent a chill down Traoré's spine. This is our true power. Show no one their knowledge of this would be the end of our freedom when the time is right. When a leader of courage emerges, this will be Burkina Faso's path to true independence. Traoré rubbed his tired eyes, trying to process the implications. If this map was correct, and Sankara was not one for exaggeration, Burkina Faso's gold reserves were at least 3 times larger than officially reported. This wasn't just a statistical discrepancy. It was a revelation that could transform one of the world's poorest nations into a regional economic power. With these resources, they could build schools, hospitals, infrastructure. They could pay off crippling international debts. They could break the cycle of dependency that had kept the country bound to foreign interests. Since independence, the door opened softly, and Ibrahim, his young economic advisor, entered with a stack of reports. Seeing the president's intense focus on the map, he approached cautiously. Sir, I've brought the IMF assessment you requested, but I see you're occupied with something else. Traoré hesitated. In his 7 months as president, he had learned to be cautious about whom to trust. Western intelligence agencies had eyes and ears throughout the government, placed there during decades of neocolonial influence, but Ouagadougou had proven his loyalty. Having turned down lucrative offers from French companies to serve his country. Come look at this, Yakuba, Traoré said, gesturing his advisor closer. Tell me what you see. Ouagadougou studied the map, his expression transitioning from curiosity to shock as he comprehended what he was seeing. Mr. President, this is this accurate? It bears Sankara's signature and seal. He was many things, but never a man who would fabricate something of this magnitude. Ouagadougou traced the gold deposit markings with his finger. The Guibo region, the Guerma Mountains areas, we've been told, are either devoid of resources or inaccessible due to security concerns. Areas Traoré noted where French special forces have maintained a heavy presence for years under the pretext of counter-terrorism operations. The two men's eyes met, a moment of understanding passing between them. We must verify this information, Rose said. Finally, we need to examine these regions, take samples, confirm what the map suggests. Trial. Ray nodded. And we must keep this absolutely secret. If word gets out before we're ready. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both understood the stakes. Western powers had orchestrated coups for far less than this. Assemble a small team. Traoré instructed people you would trust with your life. We need a geologist, someone not connected to Western mining interests. Dr. Braza Ouagadougou suggested immediately. He studied in Russia, returned to serve Burkina Faso. Despite offers from major corporations, his loyalty is to the soil of his homeland, not to foreign paychecks. Good, we leave in 3 days. No official motorcade, no security detail that could draw attention. We'll travel as civilians to the Guibo region. First, as Ouagadougou left to make discreet arrangements, Traoré turned back to the map. If what he was seeing was real, it would explain So much about his country's troubled history, the assassinations, the coups, the persistent foreign military presence, the unfavorable mining contracts forced upon them by international financiers. During times of crisis, Sankara had known, and they had killed him for it 3 days. Later, before dawn broke over Ouagadougou, Traoré slipped out of the presidential residence through a service entrance, dressed in simple civilian clothes, a plain shirt, jeans, and a cap pulled low over his face. He could have been any ordinary Burkinab, a nondescript SUV-weighted engine running inside were Wedrao Dr. Zeta, with his geological equipment, and 2 trusted military officers in plain clothes, Captain Sawato and Lieutenant Aya. All preparations are complete, Mr. President. We Drogo reported as they pulled away from the palace. We've created a cover story about you. Being ill and taking a day of rest, only the Prime Minister knows your actual whereabouts. Traoré nodded. The journey to Jibo will take approximately 5 hours if we avoid checkpoints. Dr. Zeta, are you confident you can conduct preliminary tests on site? The geologist, a serious man in his 50s, with gray-flecked hair and hands hardened by fieldwork, patted his equipment case. I've brought portable X-ray fluorescent analyzers and sampling tools. We won't have laboratory-grade results, but I can confirm the presence and approximate concentration of gold deposits. The journey north was tense. They took secondary roads to avoid military checkpoints, particularly those where French advisors might be present. The landscape gradually transformed from the urban sprawl of the capital to savanna, and finally to the more arid, rocky terrain of Burkina Faso's northern provinces. Jibo region had been labeled a security risk zone for years, ostensibly due to the presence of extremist groups. International travel advisories warned against visiting, and even government officials rarely ventured there without significant military escort. Yet, as they drove through small villages, what True observed was not a hotbed of terrorism, but communities struggling with poverty and neglect, people trying to survive in a harsh environment with minimal government support. These villages see more French soldiers than they do government services, Captain Sawato commented grimly as they passed through a settlement where children played in dusty yards and women carried water from distant wells. By mid-afternoon, they reached the specific area marked on Sankar's map, a nondescript stretch of rocky terrain surrounded by low hills. To the untrained eye, it looked like countless other landscapes across the Sahel. Nothing suggested it harbored one of Africa's largest untapped gold reserves. This is it, Dr. Zeta confirmed, consulting both the map and his GPS device. The coordinates match exactly. They parked in the shadow of an outcropping, setting up a small camp that could pass for a geological survey team, not unusual in West Africa, where resource exploration was common. Dr. Zeta immediately began collecting soil and rock samples, while the others maintained a watchful perimeter as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. A dust cloud in the distance signaled an approaching vehicle. Captain Sawato raised his binoculars. Local vehicle, he reported, an old pickup truck. To occupants, tension eased slightly, but hands remained close to concealed weapons. As the truck approached and stopped a respectful distance away, an elderly man emerged, using a wooden staff for support, followed by a younger man who appeared to be his grandson. Visitors are rare in these parts. The old man called out in Moor, the local language, especially important visitors who disguise themselves as ordinary men. Traoré exchanged glances with his companions. How had this man recognized him despite his civilian attire? He stepped forward, deciding that honesty might be the wisest approach. We are conducting a geological survey, he replied in the same language. The old man smiled, revealing missing teeth. The president of Burkina Faso does not travel to Jibo in secret for a routine survey. He gestured to the surrounding landscape. You have come for what lies beneath, have you not? What has been hidden from your people for generations? Stunned silence fell over Traoré's group. The elderly man approached, moving with surprising agility. Despite his apparent age, I am Bationo, He introduced himself. "My grandfather was a spiritual leader in this region during the time of the French occupation. Come to our village. It is not safe to stay in the open as night approaches, and there are things you should know." Against the security officer's reservations, Traoré made the decision to follow Bationo to his village, a cluster of traditional homes about 4 kilometers away. As they entered the settlement, children ran alongside their vehicles, curious about the strangers, while adults emerged from their homes, somehow sensing that this was no ordinary visit. They were led to the village's central meeting place, where elders had already gathered, as if expecting them. A meal was being prepared, and Traoré was invited to sit in the place of honor. Protocol would normally demand that his identity be concealed, but it was clear these villagers already knew. "Who walked among them? How did you know who I am?" Traoré asked Bationo. Directly. The old man, who Traoré now realized must be well over 100 years old, smiled again. Words in ways the French never understood. When a true son of the soil moves, the soil knows. As night fell and lanterns were lit, casting warm light over the gathering, Bationo revealed a story that had been passed down through generations of village elders. The French discovered gold here in 1953. He began, his voice carrying surprising strength. Their geologists found what they called the mother lode, a gold deposit so vast it would have made our country one of the richest in the region. But colonial powers do not make colonies rich, they extract wealth and leave poverty. He described how the French colonial administration had classified the discovery as a state secret, planning to announce and exploit it only after ensuring proper control mechanisms were in place to prevent the wealth from empowering independence movements. But one of their geologists had a conscience. Bationo continued, "A man named Duval, who had lived among us and taken a Burkina wife. He revealed the truth to our elders and helped create maps documenting all the gold deposits across our capsules, across composites, across our land." When independence came in 1960, these maps were secretly passed to the new government. But successive leaders were either corrupted or threatened into silence. Only Thomas Sankara had planned to use this knowledge to break free from neocolonial control, a plan cut short by his assassination. "Our elders have been guardians of this secret," Bationo said, looking directly at Traoré, "waiting for a leader who would use this wealth not for personal gain, but for the true liberation of our people." Dr. Zeta approached, interrupting the storytelling with barely contained excitement. "Mr. President," he said, forgetting protocol in his enthusiasm, "the preliminary results from my samples. The gold concentration is extraordinary. If these readings are consistent throughout the region marked on the map, we're looking at one of the largest gold deposits in Africa." A murmur went through the gathering. Traoré absorbed this confirmation, feeling the weight of history and possibility pressing down on him. Before he could respond, Captain Sawato rushed in from the perimeter where he had been monitoring communications. "Mr. President," he said urgently, "we're picking up unusual radio traffic. French Special Forces units are mobilizing from their base in Ouagadougou, citing intelligence about terrorist movement in this exact region. They're deploying helicopter units." The revelation sent a chill through the gathering. It couldn't be coincidence. How could they know? Widro asked, voicing everyone's concern. "We have a leak," Traoré said grimly. "Someone in the palace must have observed our departure or accessed information about our journey." Bationo raised his hand for silence. "There is another way to Doug," he said, "ancient paths known only to our people. No French helicopter will find you there within minutes." They were moving again, this time following Bationo's grandson through the darkness along barely visible trails that wound through ravines and dense acacia groves behind them. They could hear the distant thump of helicopter rotors approaching the village. They had just left the journey back to the capital, took all night traveling on foot and by borrowed motorcycles through terrain that seemed impassable but yielded to local knowledge. As dawn broke, they reached a small farming community just outside Ouagadougou, where a loyal minister waited with vehicles to transport them back to the presidential palace through service entrances. By the time Traoré re-entered the palace. Reports were already coming in French. Special forces had conducted a counter-terrorism operation in the Djibo region, specifically targeting the village where they had met with Batono. The official statement claimed they had intelligence about a high-level terrorist meeting. No mention was made of geological surveys or gold. Traoré immediately convened his most trusted advisors as security Chief Ouedraogo, Finance Minister Kabore, and Defense Minister Sankara. No relation to the former president, but named in his honor, the small group gathered in a secure room, regularly swept for surveillance devices. "The situation is clear," said Traoré, spreading Sankara's map on the secure conference table. "This map shows gold reserves that could transform our nation, but the French have somehow learned about our discovery, and they will do everything to prevent us from accessing these resources." "How did they find out so quickly?" asked Khyber. "We have a leak," said Security Chief Ouedraogo grimly. "Someone close to us is working for foreign interests." Traoré nodded. "We need to identify the traitor, but more importantly, we need to secure these gold reserves before it's too late." Defense Minister Sankara leaned forward. "The French will intensify their presence in these regions. They'll fabricate security concerns, pressure us through international bodies, perhaps even attempt to destabilize the government. Then we must move faster than they expect," said Traoré. "I'm announcing a national resource sovereignty initiative tomorrow. Will declare all undocumented mineral deposits as national treasures under direct presidential protection." Finance Minister Kabore looked concerned. "The international backlash will be severe sanctions, banking restrictions, loan cancellations. We've prepared for this." Traoré replied calmly, "Our agreements with China and Russia will sustain us through the initial shock, and once we begin extracting this gold, we'll have leverage that no Western power can ignore." As the meeting concluded, Traoré kept Security Chief Ouedraogo behind. "Find the leak, Morris. Whoever betrayed us is still close, still listening." Ouedraogo nodded. "I already have my suspicions, Mr. President." That night, unable to sleep, Traoré stood on his balcony overlooking the capital. The city lights flickered like the gold that lay beneath his country's soil, gold that had been hidden its existence, denied to the very people who owned it. His phone rang, an encrypted line known only to 5 people. "Mr. President," came Ouedraogo's tense voice, "we've identified the source of the leak. You won't believe who it is." The next morning, French Ambassador Jean-Michel Durand arrived at the presidential palace for what he thought was a routine meeting. Instead, he found himself in a room with Traoré and several military officers. The ambassador's usual smooth demeanor faltered slightly when he noticed the grim expressions facing him. "Ambassador Durand," said Traoré coldly, "Ald, you please explain why your special forces were in the Djibo region yesterday, precisely where I happened to be conducting a confidential state visit." The ambassador maintained his composure. "Counter-terrorism operations, Mr. President. Standard procedure under our security agreement. We had intelligence about extremist elements in the area." Traoré slid a folder across the table. "Then, perhaps, you can explain these intercepted communications between your embassy and Paris. Specific mentions of gold deposits, geological surveys, and plans to secure the area before Traoré." The ambassador's face palled slightly. "I am not familiar with these communications." "Of course not," said Traoré, "just as you're not familiar with the monthly payments to my deputy minister of mines, Macho Corey, who has been sharing state secrets with your intelligence service for the past year on." The door opened, and Corey was brought in, flanked by security officers. The man looked defeated, his usual confidence replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose double life had collapsed. "Matou has been very cooperative," continued Traoré. "He's provided details of every meeting, every document shared, every French plan to maintain control over our resources." Ambassador Durand straightened his tie, attempting to regain composure. "Mr. President, I suggest we discuss this matter diplomatically. Our countries have a long-standing relationship." "Yes," interrupted Traoré, A relationship where you take and we give that ends today, he stood, signaling the end. Of the meeting, in 1 hour, I will address the nation. I will reveal the true extent of Burkina Faso's gold reserves. I will announce the immediate nationalization of all undocumented mineral deposits, and I will present evidence of your government's attempts to undermine our sovereignty. The ambassador's diplomatic veneer cracked. You can't do this. The economic consequences. The consequences of not doing it would be far worse, said Traoré. My people living in poverty while sitting on mountains of gold. No more. As the ambassador was escorted out, Traoré turned to Ouedago. They will retaliate. Prepare for everything coup. Attempts economic sanctions, international isolation. Ouedraogo nodded. We're ready, sir. 1 hour later, Ibrahim Traoré stood before the cameras, addressing not just his nation, but the world. Behind him hung the flag of Burkina Faso, its bright red representing the revolution, the green symbolizing abundance, and the yellow star standing for the mineral wealth of the country, a symbolism that was about to take on new meaning. Citizens of Burkina Faso, he began, his voice steady and clear. Today, I bring you news that will change the course of our history for decades. The true wealth of our nation has been hidden from us, kept secret by those who wish to control us through poverty and dependence. He held up Sankara's map, now verified by Dr. Zeta's findings. This document, created during colonial times and preserved by patriots, reveals gold deposits 3 times larger than officially recorded gold that belongs to you, the people of Burkina Faso. He continued, his voice growing stronger. For too long, foreign powers have maintained the fiction that our nation is poor, that we need their aid, their loans, their expertise, all while knowing the truth that beneath our soil lies enough wealth to build schools, hospitals, infrastructure, enough to free us from foreign debt and foreign control. Today, I declare all these resources as national treasures under the protection of the state. No foreign corporation will extract this wealth without fair compensation to our people. No foreign government will dictate how we use our God-given resources. As he spoke, encrypted documents were being released. Online communications between French intelligence and their assets in Burkina Faso. Geological surveys secretly conducted by Western companies. Financial projections showing how Burkina Faso's independence would damage French economic interests in West Africa. I do not take this step lightly, said Traoré. I know the forces that will align against us, but I ask you, my fellow citizens, if we do not stand for our sovereignty now, when will we? If we do not claim what is rightfully ours, who will? The response from the international community was swift and severe. France recalled its ambassador and froze development aid. The IMF suspended loan programs. Western media described Traoré as an authoritarian nationalist threatening regional stability. But something unexpected also happened. Other West African nations, inspired by Burkina Faso's stand, began reviewing their own mining agreements. Mali, Niger, and Guinea announced similar resource sovereignty initiatives. China offered technical assistance for developing the newly discovered deposits. Russia proposed security partnerships to protect mining operations. Most significantly, the people of Burkina Faso rallied behind their president. Massive demonstrations of support filled the streets of Ouagadougou when Western banks froze the country's accounts. Local communities pulled resources to support government functions when foreign mining companies threatened to withdraw technical expertise. Burkina engineers studying abroad returned home to offer their services 6 months later. The first gold was extracted from the Djibo region under Burkina management. The purity and quantity exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Traoré established a sovereign wealth fund, ensuring that 70% of all mining revenues would go directly to infrastructure, education, and healthcare. In the village where he had met Bationo, Traoré ordered the construction of the country's most advanced technical college, specializing in geology, mining, engineering, and resource management ensuring that future generations would have the knowledge to manage their own resources. The old man himself didn't live to see the college completed, passing away peacefully 2 months after Traorré's historic announcement. But his grandson became one of its first students when Traoré visited the site a year later, watching as Burkina workers, not foreign companies, extracted wealth from their own soil. The young man approached him. "My grandfather didn't live to see this day," he told Traoré, "but he always believed it would come," he said. The true treasure of Burkina Faso was not just the gold, but the courage to claim it. Traoré nodded, looking out over the operation that was already transforming his nation's future. "Your grandfather was wise. The gold was always here beneath our feet. We just needed to find the courage to stand up and say, 'This belongs to us.'" As the sun set over the mountains of Djibo, casting a golden light across the land, Ibrahim Traoré understood that he had uncovered something far more valuable than gold. He had uncovered his nation's belief in itself, in its right to determine its own destiny. The national treasure was not just what lay beneath the soil, but what was rising in the hearts of his people, the unshakable knowledge that they were the rightful owners of their future music.